I think yeah, Ferrari. If they're in the mix for race wins every week, then yeah, the constructors is definitely on. I think yeah, they can definitely do that. And if I had to put my money on one of those two drivers, I'm going to go with Lewis just because he's got tenure, he's got motivation, and he's got ability. So yeah, and again, I'm using Fred's words again. You're not a world champion after one good weekend, and you're not a nothing or nobody after
Yeah.
a few bad races.
My pick in 25 is Charles wins it, but Ferrari maybe.
Okay.
Hello and welcome to another edition of the Tired F1 Pod. We are back and we are more tired than ever. How are you doing, Shez?
Man, tired but ready for a great weekend this weekend in Barcelona. It's going to be
That's
fun.
that's right, and then that's on the heels of a triple header too. So we're gonna be busy, my friend, for the next month or so.
Whoop, whoop.
Yeah. And what I thought we could do this time around, we generally talk a lot about Mercedes and Red Bull,
What?
and
Never.
my no, yeah, I know, right? And my poor old team gets left out. And I have to admit to you, Chaz, I have been feeling a little bit conflicted after the results in Canada, because this seems like a season that we can be really proud of, and I still think we can do that, right? But I wanted to kind of take a quick sort of check of where we're at with Ferrari right now, right? And in order to do that, I'd like to give some context. Now, I thought that after 2021, that in the heat of the season, that was Mercedes, Red Bull, Max, Lewis, Toto Wolff, Christian Horner. I felt like my team was sort of lurking in the behind, just trying to put their head down, nose to the grind, whatever sort of analogy you want to use. And we'd be ready to take 2022 and really this rule set head on. I think you can argue that Ferrari was best positioned to really be able to take it to Red Bull and Mercedes, especially Mercedes that have been dominant for a while, and you kind of see these sort of things work in cycles. And let's be honest, Ferrari hasn't really won anything noteworthy since my guy won the Drivers' Championship in '07 and then the Constructors in '08. And so there's really been a decade and a half of misery and mediocrity to just look at. And I know in between we've kind of sniffed the championship, but let's be honest, it was really never really going to work out for us. So 2022 was the year that we came to. I still remember Bahrain and the 1-2 finish that Ferrari had. And I was so excited and looking at Charles and Max go at it with each other for at least those first three races. It felt really good. And then the season started to unravel, right? And we can go through a litany of things, including, team making mistakes. I think Ferrari also kind of missed the ball with trying to stay competitive with Red Bull in general, in that they prioritized aerodynamic efficiency over sort of reducing the weight of the car. And I think it probably explains some of their tire wear issues that plagued them, not just that year, but even last year. And so long story short, right, they underperformed, and I think that's putting it very, very mildly in 22. And then, of course, your guy, my nemesis, Mattia, was shown the door at the end of 22. I still remember though that infamous scene between him and Charles after the British Grand Prix, and that sort of finger wagging or finger pointing or whatever that you want to call that, and just kind of scolding him. I just think that was kind of the sort of the symbol of what the season was, and then sort of his downfall. But cut to Fred Vasseur coming in. There's been a lot happening, right? 23 started off pretty bad, and it kind of really was bad. But I think the one good thing that I saw Fred do is sort of set into motion this cultural change of taking some level of accountability, but also not putting people under so much pressure that that it kind of you felt like you were walking on eggshells, and yet being accountable enough to make changes where they were needed. And I do remember this sort of assessment from Fred, and I think even the drivers, almost a year to the date, right after the Spanish Grand Prix, where there was this sort of like, we are nowhere kind of admission. And I'm paraphrasing their words, but I do remember them kind of coming right about this time last year and say, we got to take a step back. And lo and behold, they went back and they acknowledged the fact that the car was just simply undrivable, right? And then if it's undrivable, it's too peaky. I think we had, I want to say about 10 or 12 poles last year, or that in 22, right? but even in 23, we had quite a few, and then none of them translated into race wins, barring one in Singapore. So having taken that proverbial step back, gone back and made the car what it is, this year has been, outside of Canada, everything has been really nothing but outstanding, you could say. But I'm wondering if Ferrari have done enough. And having set the stage for that, I would love to know what you think is the case there, especially since your guy is going to join the team next year.
Yeah, I mean, I'd throw that question back at you. What does done enough look like for you?
So I would just say that for me, it's not enough, especially because I think about where we're at in 22, right? And I think Ferrari have sort of beaten me to the ground with having expectations and then just falling off a cliff, right? And so now I'm happy with what seems like a good, solid fight for a second place, and that's not really where I want to see the team be at. Now, to their credit, they've made all the organizational changes that are needed. And in fact, we've talked about how Red Bull have been formidable from an organizational structure standpoint, how Mercedes have been that for years, how McLaren have set themselves up to be that way. But in reality, second place doesn't mean anything for Ferrari, right? It really doesn't. It probably doesn't mean anything for most teams, but it certainly doesn't mean anything for Ferrari, right? And so from that standpoint, I'm a little bit worried whether we will actually be able to be competitive in 25, right? That we'll actually be able to win because the field at the top has tightened. And I think if Montreal has shown us anything, it's that Mercedes is probably in the mix, right? In some way, shape, or form. But definitely by next year they will be, right? And so I don't know, Shez. I don't know. Will we be able to win anything? Are all the pieces in play? And even the Adrian Newey arrival doesn't really change anything for 25 right out of the way, right? That's more of a long-term 26 and beyond kind of thing, right? So I don't know.
Okay, so what you're saying is you don't think that everything is in place and that they're completely where they should be. That's fine. I think, look, with teams, it always comes back to my favorite three things. A team success is defined by by how well they hit the three columns of technical, operational, and strategy. I think we have to talk about those three things individually when it comes to assessing how well Fred has kind of made an improvement at Ferrari. And I think he has. He definitely has. The probably the most important out of those three columns for me in terms of how you're going to get to the front of the grid is the technical side of things. So how quick are you making your car? And that really rests on how good your infrastructure is. And because every team in Formula One has got really clever people, really smart people, but it's the way that a modern Formula One team is actually going to do things. It's not about having one guy that just knows everything, unless you're at Red Bull, right? It's about having the right structure in place that means that the people that are there are able to make their expertise count. And I think Ferrari have been a little bit guilty in the past, not the recent past, because I think actually under Mattia Binotto, from a technical point of view, they did actually they got it right at the beginning of 2022, but they fell into the usual problem that Ferrari have, is that they weren't then able to develop the car, and that speaks to a problem in the infrastructure within the team in terms of the technical setup. And Fred seems to have got on top of that. This is the first season I've seen from Ferrari where they've turned up with a car that is competitive, but that over the course of the season hasn't then just dropped off. Like they've brought updates, and the updates have actually had a positive effect. Like the Monaco win came after all the Miami and Imola updates, right? So it suggests that although Ferrari aren't dominating Formula One, they are at least coming with a structure that allows them to bring developments, that bring performance to the car. That's a big one for me. And I think the operation and strategic side of things has been a case in point. From an operations point of view, Fred spent heavily on getting pit stops and things up to scratch. Like they invested, like pit stops aren't just about practice. It's not about like if you do a
Mhm.
thousand reps, you're just going
It's
to get
automatic.
better.
Yeah.
That's part of it. And Fred had sort of talked about that ahead of 2023 and ahead of this season. But they invested heavily in the technology that is required to make your pit stops quicker because it's not just about
Mhm.
practicing; it's about having the bits and pieces that you need to make that work. And they've done that, and they've consistently had quick pit stops now. Then again, they're not class leading. They're not sort of 1.9 second, 1.8 second pit stops, but they're there, aren't they? They're quick. And that's given them some leeway in terms of the strategy as well, which is, they've made some changes on the strategy. I keep forgetting the name of the chap that's head of strategy now. He's a nice
Is it?
Indian chap, and I forget his name.
I don't know either.
At Ferrari,
Yeah,
but
I'll think about it. Yeah.
yeah, maybe we'll flash up his name somewhere in this. Sorry for not doing my homework on that, guys. But their strategy has definitely been much more coherent, hasn't it? Like you can understand generally what they're doing. Like, okay, you can look at Canada and say, okay, what the heck were they doing there? But
Robin Jain, by the way.
that's thank you for that. It's one race where they haven't really done the business, but in general, you can kind of see that their
Yeah,
strategy's
but
kind of been there. So all of those things for me suggests that it's a team that is starting to click, and you know you'd expect that over the course of this season, given that trajectory, they continue to improve, and perhaps launch an assault on the title next season, even if they're not the only team that's gunning for it. They're in a better position to exploit what they have within their team rather than squander it, which is what they did in 2022, I think.
can I also add this element of it? I failed to mention this. Fred has himself said that in recruiting technical people, right, or just staff in general, Ferrari are at a bit of a disadvantage, right, in that they're based in Italy, whereas Mercedes, Red Bull, McLaren, they don't really have those challenges per se, right? And I know this kind of gets some of this gets into just the logistics of, we're all now in a work from home kind of phase in whatever life looks like for most of us, not all of us, right? But for a sport like this, you can't really do that kind of stuff, right? So even with all the technology in the world, it sort of geographic challenges still remain, right? How do you feel about that part?
Yeah, I think that's always been a problem for Ferrari. I remember thinking about John Barnard times two, both of his stints at Ferrari. He refused to actually come to Maranello. He was a championship winning Formula One designer, absolute legend. He was the guy that brought the paddle shift to F1 in a Ferrari in 1989, but didn't want to come to Maranello. But the flip side to what you're saying is that actually there's a mystique and a law to Ferrari that other teams don't have.
Sure.
So you have to balance the fact that they're in a different country with the fact that they have quite a big draw to them. And living in Italy is lovely. If you've
Oh,
ever
of
been to
course. Yes,
Maranello,
sure.
better
Yeah.
go. It's
Yeah.
it's beautiful and that absolutely lovely part of the world. I think the Adrian Newey signing is the one that we're all hoping is going to happen. I'm certainly hoping that's going to happen. Um, he's obviously going to be reluctant, I think, to move away from where he lives in the heart of England and come all the way to Italy. But but the role that he would fulfill and the job that Ferrari need him for, not a chief designer necessarily, but a sort of Uber consultant, somebody that can come and sprinkle the magic dust on what you're doing and maybe set the path that your technical team is taking.
Yeah.
It doesn't necessarily need him to be in Maranello. I mean, it would be better, of course it would, but could there be a scenario where he does work remotely and offers his expertise from afar and he sort of turns up at races and in Maranello face to face when he actually needs to. So it's all about infrastructure again. If Fred can make that work, and he's shown that he can provide the environment to make things work, then yes. Ammar, I think the best thing about Fred, right, is the attitude that he brings to Ferrari. It's not about individual,
Yeah.
it's not about the results that you see right now. It's about the vibe that's coming out of Maranello right now, right? And if you look at what Fred is doing, he's doing what another diminutive Frenchman did at Ferrari um, back in the mid 90s. When Jean Todt turned up in 95, um, Ferrari were an absolute shambles. They had two drivers that couldn't get anything out of their car. They had a chief designer that was living in another country, but was basically sending stuff over to the bods at Maranello. And the Maranello guy was like, "Who is this guy who's sending stuff to us? We're going to do our own thing." So there was no joined up thinking, and it just showed on track. And Jean Todt came in. He made some really good hires. He brought in Michael Schumacher. He then brought in Ross Brawn. He brought in Rory Byrne. He brought all the championship winning guys at Benetton, and he created the infrastructure that allowed them to become, you know, a a championship winning machine in the early noughties. But it didn't come from nowhere. 96, 97, 98, 99 were all building years. That I think is what Fred looks at here as well. I think Fred is able to kind of go, look, we can't panic if we don't win a championship in one season, but we also can't go, oh, amazing, we've done it after one race win. There's a middle ground, and what he doesn't allow is what the other team principals that have been at Ferrari have done, which is to kind of not allow that sort of level playing field to happen, to kind of um, allow the team to flourish, to ask a lot from the team, but allow the team to do the things that they need to do to excel in the areas that they can excel in, to hold them accountable, to say, okay, all right, look, we didn't do well here, but not blame people, to not kind of turn around and say,
Yeah.
right, you did this, you're out the door, but also make the changes where they need to be made. So if you're finding that actually a problem is there, can we improve things to optimize things better? Case in point is Charles Leclerc's race engineer. From the outside, you could see that Charles was struggling a little bit in terms of getting his point across in races, and maybe not getting the information that he needed. We are checking has become a byword. So they brought in Brian Botzi, didn't they? And he's already sort of had a positive effect on them. And what Jean Todt had done and what Ross Brawn did was that they came in and they told them, look, stop listening to the press. It's not about what the press is saying, it's about what we are seeing. So one result is not the end of the world. Fred had this to say, this is via the race after Canada. He said, we are not world champions after a good weekend, and we are not nowhere after a tough weekend. And that's what the press in Italy tend to do. It's
Yeah.
jubilation after one race, and it's public
Well,
beheadings after another. So not having that is what Fred is doing right now. It's what Jean Todt did. And I think that, for me, gives me confidence that they're going to do well over the coming seasons.
yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. I think ultimately this boils down to a simple thing, right? Which is probably the element of success in most organizations and outfits, regardless of whether you're a racing outfit, whether you're a healthcare giant, whatever else that might be, right? Or whether you're delivering parcels within an hour of being ordered, right? It's ultimately about creating the kind of culture that allows for people to flourish, that does not sort of have a knee-jerk reaction, which Ferrari have had, in a while, and they've been very, very keen on making knee-jerk reactions and changes. And I think from that standpoint, hopefully the lore of working with Fred, who really seems delightful in every way. I'm sure he's making tough decisions as time comes, but the idea that you can work in an outfit that has all of this romanticism, right, with everything that comes with Ferrari, but added that it can be that place to work and really kind of put them over the top. I want to pivot to what you had sort of said in sort of the last category, which is driver lineup, right? I can't let you go without this, right? Because this is the part that gives me a lot of anxiety when I think about next year, or at least the next couple of years, and I've argued this with you time and time again. And I'll just sort of pose it as a question, I guess. Are we doing the right thing by bringing in, yes, a former world champion, a 7-time world champion, one of one in his own right, But the reality of what that is it's not about what you did yesterday. It's about what you're doing right now, right? And Lewis Hamilton, as we've chronicled in the last month or so, is coming through a whirlwind of a season emotionally in the press, whatever, everything else, right? Is this what the team need now when they seem to be having a driver pairing that is very symbiotic, right? And I'm not suggesting for a second that they won't be that, but I mean, they're going to have two drivers that are gunning for championships. They've sort of committed to Charles in the long term, and they're committing to Lewis in whatever format this seems like, and trying to get him that eighth championship. And I wonder if all of this will kind of spell disaster when maybe we are in the race mix, right? When we're in the mix of winning a championship, and one driver has to cede to another, and what all of that brings in.
I would say don't listen to the fan bases. Like the performance of that team isn't based on social media outcry. I think those two will do fine,
But
even
how
if
can
in
you
a
say that? Let me. I'm sorry to interrupt there, but Ferrari as a team have always. I mean, this is part of their fabric is to respond to all of that. I get what you're saying that we shouldn't respond to it, but can you just behold the lore of Lewis Hamilton and all the voices that he brings with him? By the way, I'm not holding him accountable for what his fans say, but it does come. The circus does come with him, right? And the circus that is Ferrari, because they are unlike any other team. They're not Mercedes, they're not Red Bull. They don't have the level of fans or fanatics really that are as passionate about this. Like how can there not be? I mean, there's going to be a point at which says that you can't turn the volume down no matter what you do, and there's no place to hide these days because social media is everywhere.
Yeah, those fans don't live inside Maranello. Yeah, they might talk at you from Twitter, but ultimately they don't work inside the corridors of the factory. Fred just needs to do what he has been doing right now, isolate the team from the nonsense, the noise that's coming outside, whether it's coming from the Tifosi or it's coming from the cult of Lewis Hamilton. It doesn't really matter. He just needs to keep doing what they're doing. What Braun had done when he turned out was that he basically took all of the newspapers out of the coffee rooms. That's what Ferrari had
Drop
had
your phone before
before
you
he was
come
there.
in.
Mate, I'm telling you, turn off your Twitter notifications, turn off your social media notifications. Don't listen to what your cousin's sister's mother has just said, who's probably your aunt actually. But it's not about what the hairdresser's saying. It's about what's happening
Wow,
in your
hairdresser.
factory.
Okay.
And that's what Fred is doing right now. He's that buffer between the
Yeah.
outside world and Maranello, I think, and it's what is allowing them
Yeah.
to flourish. And if he can keep doing that next season, it doesn't really matter what the fan bases are saying. It really doesn't.
But what about
A
the
week into
idea
you
that the
having
two
it,
drivers will be fighting each other? I mean, yes, there's
sure.
social media and
So
all that,
let's
but
talk.
but there's nothing. I mean, on track, you can't really.
Yeah. So it depends what you want, right? So I think in that scenario, Ferrari will have the strongest driver lineup on the grid. And I think in terms of the constructors, if they bring a car that is close to where Red Bull are right now in terms of the competitive order, then they're on it for the constructors. They might even be on it this season. In terms of the drivers, again, history kind of tells you that it's only in rare situations where a driver lineup that is super strong isn't able to wrest a driver's title out of a strong car. So I can think of maybe two seasons really where a strong driver lineup managed to not get the driver's title. And in both of those seasons, they probably should have anyway. So 1986 is the one I always go back to. Nigel Mansell versus Nelson Piquet, where Prost snuck the title because there was infighting between the two teams, between the two drivers. Again, Williams still won the constructors that year, and then 2007, where Lewis
Ah,
and Fernando went up against each other. And again, if there hadn't been a whole heap of sabotage, espionage, all this nonsense in the background, McLaren would have probably
I mean,
won the constructors title that
hadn't been
season.
sabotage, they wouldn't be in the mix either. But yeah, sure.
Yeah, sure. I would suggest going back and having a look at some of the evidence from back there. But
Maybe.
anyway, so they probably
You do
would have won the
realize
constructors.
you do realize that Lewis Hamilton was at the center of that, right? And he's one of the protagonists in next year's
Yeah, but then
20.
if you then sort of walk that forward again, you look at 2014, 2015, 2016, you
Yeah,
had two strong drivers at Mercedes, and
yeah.
one of those two in each of those seasons
Well, I mean,
won the drivers.
they were so dominant too, though, right? Like it didn't really matter. Like it's kind of like,
So
I mean, if Red Bull had that run with Max and
sure, but you need
Checo, if Checo were that, right?
so if
But
you want to, if you want to do that in 2010, in 2010, Red Bull had a car worthy of a title, and Sebastian Vettel and Mark Webber went at it,
they did.
and Sebastian Vettel still won the title. And
They did.
again, in 2012, okay, Seb was probably the man who was going to do it, but Mark Webber was hardly falling away.
No.
Nürburgring, Silverstone were great wins for him that year. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's not as if it's not as if it's not possible to win a driver's title when you have two competitive drivers. And actually, I would argue that having in this modern era of Formula One, if Fred has got the infrastructure right and the strategy and the operations are on point, then that will allow
No.
both drivers to flourish and will allow one of them to come out on top. It doesn't matter that they're both competitive. They don't take points off each other. They then take points off everybody else. That's what you want to be doing.
All right. My final question to you, and I need this. We haven't prepped for this. 2025. Ferrari are in the mix for race wins. Like there's not a single race that they cannot win. It's not that they're dominant, but there's not a single race that they cannot win. With that as context, does Ferrari win the championship, the constructors championship?
Yeah.
Okay, and then which driver wins the drivers championship?
I'm still going to bank on Lewis.
I think I don't think Ferrari win the constructors next year.
If they can win every single race, they're not going to win the constructors.
Well,
That's
but
what you're
no,
saying.
but I'm not suggesting they're gonna. I'm just suggesting that they're in the mix for winning every single race. My pick in 25 is Charles wins it, but Ferrari maybe.
Okay. I think yeah, Ferrari. If they're in the mix for race wins every week, then yeah, the constructors is definitely on. I think yeah, they can definitely do that. And if I had to put my money on one of those two drivers, I'm going to go with Lewis just because he's got tenure, he's got motivation, and he's got ability. So yeah, and again, I'm using Fred's words again. You're not a world champion after one good weekend, and you're not a nothing or a nobody after
Yeah,
a few bad races. So I would say don't look at Lewis Hamilton based on the first 9 races of 2024. Look at
absolutely.
his entire body of work and then
Yeah,
make that judgment.
yeah, fair enough. And on that bombshell, thank you for watching. Thanks for subscribing. Leave a comment. Tell us how we're doing. Tell us if I'm right or Shez is going to be right. I'm sure our audience will have something to say about how we've done today.